Conversations with Rita show. I am very honored and happy to have as my first guest the one and only renowned Mr. Scotty Barnhart. Scotty Barnhart is a director for the Count Basie Orchestra. He is also a professor at Florida State University. He has written a book, The World of Jazz Trumpet, as well as produced a CD. And I'm so happy to have you here. I'm going to start off by asking you, how did you get started with music? Is there anyone in your family who influenced your love for music?
Yeah, well, my mother was a singer and pianist, so probably I'm sure I got it from her and her side of the family. But being in church every Sunday at Ebenezer Baptist Church, we had a different choir every Sunday. So growing up in that environment, it was easy to just always be surrounded by music. So that's kind of how it happened.
Okay, all right. So do you perform at Ebenezer as well?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I think I started playing trumpet when I was 9, and I believe one of the first places I played other than at school was in church one Sunday, or part of a skit, like a holiday religious skit, one of those things. They had me playing the trumpet or holding it or something. And but mainly I got started playing in elementary school, Terry Mill Elementary, which I think is now Barack Obama School for the Arts, I think, in Decatur. And my teacher was Stanley Gosier, who was a trumpet player.
I remember Mr. Gosier.
So I got started there in 5th grade. That was 1974. And by the time I got to Gordon High School, when I was in 8th grade, then Mr. Boykin, who's since passed away, the band director there, kind of saw that I had some talent, and he kind of pushed me and made me get a private teacher and all those kind of things. So that's kind of how it happened.
Okay. You started out young at 9, and you say that you play the trumpet. You started playing the trumpet. Is that the only instrument?
No. Piano. Piano is my second instrument.
Okay.
Yeah, but I went to Florida A&M to get a degree in music education. You have to be able to play certain other instruments because you might end up teaching.
Okay.
So if you're a brass player like me, trumpet, you still have to learn clarinet or flute, and then trombone maybe, and percussion, and a little bit of strings, so you're well-rounded. Okay. But piano is the one that stuck with me the best. And so I play piano just as much as I play trumpet now.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow. Well, speaking of percussion, I believe I read somewhere where you said that you also can play the drums.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, that was my first instrument, actually. The first set of instruments that my parents bought was a set of drums before I got the trumpet. But I was probably 5 or 6, and, just beating on stuff. And, so I didn't really take the drums seriously. And but I've played with some of the greatest drummers in the world, so I'm always watching and trying to take in what they're doing to add to what I'm doing. So,
All right. Well, you say you started out at 9, and you talked about how you progressed through elementary school up to high school, up to college. There are a lot of young people who want a professional career in music, but I don't think they understand the work ethic behind it. As a teenager, how much time would you spend rehearsing?
Oh, every day, practicing every day. You want to be if you're gonna make a. See, I never thought about a career. I mean, I guess that's an obvious byproduct of what I was doing, but I was thinking about getting better. I wasn't thinking about making money or joining somebody's band. Maybe that came maybe a little later, but initially, I'm just trying every day just to master the trumpet. That's hard enough. I'm just trying to do that because I know if I can do that, the other stuff will take care of itself. You can't really, any great musician will tell you, anybody that's made it, quote unquote, will tell you, you can't really plan somebody calling you to offer you a job or offer you a gig or offer you an audition. You can't plan that. You never know when that call is coming. So the trick is to be ready when it does come. That's the trick, because once somebody calls you and you aren't ready, you might not ever get that call again. So every day, I tell my students this all the time, you have the opportunity to get better and better every single day. I mean, every day. That's what the focus should be. It should be the music. It shouldn't be, joining somebody's band or trying to make a lot of money or trying to do a recording. Those things will come if you're prepared. So the key to me was always just working on stuff every day and just, doing that. But you have to have a love of doing that, too. So I love practicing just as much as I love playing. To me, they're not any different. They're the same thing. So when I'm practicing, I'm trying to get it right. I'm not messing around. I'm trying to get it right And that way I know once I get on the stage to play, I can relax and just play.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so it does. I don't. People ask me all the time, do I get nervous? I don't have time to get nervous. I'm
Right.
thinking about what I'm doing.
Right.
So that's just how I am.
Okay.
And all the musicians that I know and that I've worked with, it's pretty much the same. You're thinking about trying to master your instrument or just the basic fundamentals of music, not anything that's beyond your control. The only thing that you can control as a musician is your abilities on whatever instrument you were playing,
Okay.
or your voice. If you're a vocalist, you can control that. You
Okay.
can't control calls coming into you or offers coming into you. So if you get yourself together, usually things work out.
Okay.
Usually, yeah.
Okay. Another thing too about this generation, I think they missed out on the quality of music that existed probably up until the 80s, and I
Yeah.
definitely know 70s.
Sure.
Like the big bands like Earth,
Mhm.
Wind and Fire, so forth and
Mhm.
so on. As a matter of fact, a lot of high school bands will go back and
Yeah.
play
Yeah.
that type of music.
Yeah.
With that said, the fact that you were in school during the 70s,
Mhm.
80s, what made you choose swing jazz
Mhm.
over R&B type band music?
Well, because it's the most interesting, and it's
Okay.
the most. I mean, just from a musical standpoint, and I can say that truthfully and objectively too. When you go to the piano or you listen to, for example, Basie or Duke Ellington or John Coltrane or Miles Davis, when you dissect that music and you figure out what they're doing, what it takes to do that, versus an R&B group like Earth, Wind and Fire. And I love Earth, Wind and Fire,
Yeah,
but
too.
those are two different levels of achievement on instruments when it comes to harmony, when it comes to composition, when it comes to performance. Those are two different levels. So for me, it was always a challenge to see if I could play on the level of a jazz musician. I mean, like a seasoned jazz musician, which is one of the things that you never ever find a child prodigy in jazz. That's one of the things you never find that.
Interesting.
And that's a reason for that, because this music is so difficult to learn, and there's no one real set way to learn it. And like in classical music, you have a 4 or 5-year-old kids all over the world now, 10-year-olds that can play Bach and Beethoven, and they give concerts and all this. You don't have a 10-year-old kid that can play Duke Ellington. You don't have a 10-year-old kid that can play the music of Miles Davis. I mean, really play it. You don't have a 10-year-old kid that can play the music of Monk and
Okay.
improvise on that, because that music, jazz music, is an extremely, it's high math is what it
Right.
is. I'm trying to find a different way to explain it to the masses, but it's high math, and it takes a level of intellectual engagement that you don't find in a lot of other art. That's all.
Okay.
I'm not saying that it's putting other musics down,
Right.
but the best way to understand it is to really just to be a musician
Okay.
that can play both. I can play
Right.
classical music, I can play R&B, Earth, Wind, and
Okay.
Fire, but I can play jazz too.
Okay.
And I'm 52 years old now, and I can tell you, from all of the years of experience that I've had, there's nothing more difficult than learning how to play jazz,
Okay.
swing, or improvisation when it comes to improvising with different people.
Right.
And jazz, like Winton said years ago, another way to explain it, is the only music in the present tense. Classical music is in the past tense. The music is written down.
Right.
The music is committed to score. Everybody knows what they have to do. But in jazz, music is being created right on the spot, and you're doing it with other individuals.
Okay.
So I'm not by myself.
Right.
So I have to engage with what the pianist is doing. He has to do with what he or she, and I have to listen to what the bassist is doing, the drums are doing, and all of that into one cohesive thing. And another way to explain it, another analogy would be if you took Beethoven, had him sitting at one piano, and you took Chopin, had him at another piano sitting right next to Beethoven, and then you added Bartok on another piano sitting right next to them, and then you added Haydn on another piano, and have the 4 of those guys or those musicians improvising on one theme at the same time.
Wow.
And that's what jazz musicians do
Okay.
every time we play.
Okay.
So one person can have an idea or something, he can play it rhythmically or harmonically, and the other 3 have to decide in a split second if they want to deal with that or not,
Okay.
or incorporate it into what they're doing.
Okay.
So it's a very involved process. That's why we've never had any child prodigies in the music. We have them
That's
younger
very
now.
interesting.
Yeah, it's very
I
interesting.
never knew
Yeah,
that.
exactly right. That's why so for me, no other music makes me feel a certain way.
Okay.
Don't listen to Basie or Miles or Duke Ellington or Gene Harris or Monty Alexander or Wynton, all these great jazz musicians, that music is when everybody is together, it's like the heartbeat becomes one.
Right.
And it creates a whole nother level of awareness as a human being. That's what happens.
Okay.
That's what it means when you hear jazz musicians always say, man, that music is swinging, or if it's not swinging. But when we say it's swinging, that's what that means.
Okay.
And it's like any good gospel choir you may hear, whatever music you like, or Earth, Wind, and Fire, whatever,
Right.
makes you feel that music in your spine or your bones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what jazz does.
Okay. All right. I do have a quote of yours where you were talking about, and I did actually write it. I shouldn't do this, but I want to read
It's
it
okay.
correctly. You said that jazz music forces you to love one another, put yourself on the line, and try to understand another human being. This is a quote from the Tallahassee Democrat newspaper.
Okay.
With all of the divisiveness going on recently in this country about race, religion, and other issues, what role could jazz play in bringing harmony and unity?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll start with saying, in the 50s, the State Department, the United States State Department, used to send people like Dizzy Gillespie, Benny Goodman, and other jazz musicians as goodwill ambassadors to countries in the world that were hot spots, that they needed to kind of soften up a little bit before they could put in a diplomat, or before they could send our Secretary of State or any other politician to try to calm. Yeah, Dizzy Gillespie went on these State Department tours, and they would go to places in the Middle East. They would go all over the world. So, and again, when you look at a jazz band, you can have different races, you can have different, different levels of age and all of that, different sexes, men and women. And when you look at a real authentic jazz band play, you can see that variety, but they're all dealing with one theme.
Right.
And so that's what jazz musicians could do. I wish they would bring that back and send jazz musicians like the Count Basie Orchestra or Lincoln Center or whomever around to some of these places in the world. And that's one of the reasons I still think that the orchestra, the Count Basie Orchestra, is still so vital and is still welcome in so many places around the world as we travel, because we do that. Our audiences are diverse. They aren't one particular age group. They aren't one particular demographic. They are just all different ages of people. It's family friendly, 3 to 103. And I've met people from all walks of life, from the king of Thailand down to the cab driver who took me to the hotel from the airport. He ends up at the concert.
Oh, wow.
You meet all of these different people.
Wow.
And the music, if you really pay attention to it, gives you everything you need to really make your life better.
And on that same note, a lot of historians believe that jazz was very instrumental in helping to spearhead the civil rights movement.
Yeah, exactly right. There's a quote from Dr. King that I have in my book. I can't remember the whole quote from now, but he talks about how jazz helped the movement, how its rhythms mirrored the struggle of the movement and the happy times, the sad times, all of those kinds of things. And people like John Coltrane wrote tunes like Alabama that was, about those young girls that were killed in the church. And so a lot of musicians did what they could. If they weren't marching, they were making music that reflected what King and Malcolm X and Medgar Evers and all these great politicians were trying to tell the country. That's right there in the music. So if you go through, for example, John Coltrane is a perfect example. If you go through all of his music, you can follow the whole civil rights movement in his music. It goes just like that until the day he died, which is in 1967.
Okay.
But you follow his music, and one of the reasons that he ended up doing a record called A Love Supreme, he was trying to tell people it's just one love, which is what Bob Marley was saying, 30 years later.
Right.
So it's all of those struggles that Dr. King and all these people went through. The grandeur of it is what jazz represents.
Okay.
Jazz, you take somebody like Duke Ellington, who was our greatest composer, and you listen to his music in the 60s. I mean, you can hear all of those things going on in there, but it's done with such a grandeur, a level of style and a level of sophistication that it elevates everybody. It doesn't stoop down to the level of the water hoses on the people and the lynchings and the shootings and stuff. It elevates. It tries to elevate the level of the narrative, basically.
Right.
So that's one of the beauties of jazz, and we can still do it.
Right.
People just have to listen to it. I told the audience, we played in Vermont last Sunday, and I told the audience right when we were about to leave, about to close out, I said, think about it. What would the world be like if everybody listened to what Basie was doing?
Right.
If everybody, because I truly think the music you listen to has an effect on how you act as a person. There's a book that Ellis Marsalis told me about, I never found, but it's called Music and Man, and it's about that very thing.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, because music is vibrations.
Right.
And vibrations, I mean, if you want, when you go get a massage, the music that they put on is not the same music as you would hear if you go to a heavy metal concert.
Right.
They don't lay you down and put on the Who.
Right.
True. Or you know what I mean? Or even Earth, Wind, Fire.
Right.
They lay you down and put on music that's calm.
Right.
So that's another example of how sounds
Okay.
affect the mind of everybody that hears them.
Right.
So if you fill your mind with, good sounds,
Right.
generally you might be able to produce a better life, a better relationship with somebody, or a better friendship with somebody, be a better husband, better parent, whatever.
Right.
All of that stuff affects people.
Okay.
And so in jazz, you have all of those things. Each musician brings his or her own level of awareness of the world to the music. So for me, that's why I can never get enough, I never have enough jazz records, because you want to hear, like Miles did about 60 recordings. So to really get to know him, don't you think it would make sense to have about 60 or
Right.
55
Right.
instead of 3?
Right.
And so when you have all these people's recordings, you really get to see what they contributed to the world, how they thought about the world. And I equate jazz musicians like Basie and Ellington and Coltrane and Monk and Miles and Wynton and people like that. I equate them with some of the greatest thinkers ever of the 20th century. When you hear or see people talk about great thinkers of the 20th century, they hardly ever have a musician in there. Hardly ever.
That's
It's always a philosopher.
That's
it's always
true.
maybe a politician or a civil rights leader, which is fine.
Right.
But Duke Ellington.
Right.
If you listen to his music and you'll start figuring out the kind of mind that he had, he was one of a kind. To write that much music, to keep that many men on the road for that long, 50 years, Thelonious Monk was another one. Oscar Peterson was another one. Count Basie. I mean, Dinah Washington, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday wrote Strange Fruit. You know what that's about?
Yeah, I do.
So
Sounds
think
amazing.
about, exactly. So
Right.
think about the fact, the kind of mind that she had to have to be able to put that out there that way.
During that time period.
During that time, but in
Right.
such an elegant way. Although the tune is about lynching, it's done in an elegant way.
Right.
It's not done in a, like a really kind of a screaming back at you kind of a way,
Right.
like, look what you're doing.
Right.
It's making you, it's just, this is what's going on.
That probably also too goes back to the coded language that our ancestors had to use
Yeah.
during slavery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like with the Negro spirituals.
Mhm.
You're saying one thing, but it means completely something else. Okay, let's see. Who's your favorite jazz artist?
That's a hard one. That's a real hard one. But I always go back to John Coltrane, probably John Coltrane.
Okay.
Because in his music, you could hear everything. You could hear the spirituals. You could hear the down-home blues. You could hear the contemporary sounds of his particular period that he lived in, from the 40s to the 60s. You can hear the civil rights movement in it. His music swung all the time, but it was real spiritual. His father was a minister. So when you hear his music, it's like there's no messing around. There's no note wasted. There's no joking around. Although you can't hear not harmony, but humor in his music, especially from his drummer, Elvin Jones. But then again, Basie and Ellington and Miles and Freddie Hubbard, there's a lot of them. But
Any contemporary?
today, musicians today, who would I like today? Well, I like people like Earl Klugh. I like, there's a young pianist who's the closest probably to the jazz, being a jazz prodigy that we've had. His name is Joey Alexander. He's about 14 or 15. I like him. I like guys that I work with, like pianist Eric Reed, who's in Wynton's band. All of the guys in the Basie Orchestra, of course, and a lot of them do other things too. My mind is drawing a blank as far as other musicians, but I like, groups like, oh God, I can't think of the group's name right now, but the Yellow Jackets, I don't know if they're still around, Spyro Gyra. A lot of musicians I like,
Okay.
I don't dislike any music. I just, as long as it's not physically hard to hear, like loud and distorted, I'll check it out. Brazilian music, classical music, pop music.
Okay.
I grew up in the 70s, so I grew up with the Carpenters,
Right.
James
I like
Brown,
this, yeah.
Earth, Wind and Fire, Captain Linton Hill, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Kool and the Gang,
Yes.
and some friends of mine I still play with Kool and the Gang and Earth, Wind and Fire.
Okay.
So I try to have a wide variety of music that I listen to, but jazz is probably 85-90% of that. That's
Okay.
all. Yeah.
All right. Taking a little detour from music for a little while. You lead the Count Basie Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
You are a professor
Mm-hmm.
in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
You're now doing a concert on your own.
Mm-hmm.
How does Scotty relax?
Playing pool with my nephew when I beat him.
Okay.
I love my dad. But I like to play pool. But
Okay.
see, the thing about jazz to me is that it's relaxing at the same time. So when I'm relaxing, I'm still listening to it.
Okay.
But really, the part that really relaxes is when I sit at my piano and play.
Mm.
That's the most relaxing because
Okay.
I can doodle around, I can noodle and find different chords and play songs and stuff like that. When I play the trumpet, it's relaxing, but it's more work. It's more because I'm getting ready to go play somewhere. But relaxing, I like to go to the movies. I like to surf the internet. I like to read about different things in history. I like to read a lot, and when I'm home in LA, I'll just go to the beach or something and just look at the water. But I like to play pool. That's my main.
I never knew that.
Oh yeah, I haven't missed a
Okay.
shot in like 6 months.
Okay. Oh, wow.
No, I'm just joking. But no, I like to play pool when I can.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I like to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You made your first solo CD, Say It Plain.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to do that? What's your favorite song on there? And is there another CD in your future?
Yeah, well, everybody wants to do a solo CD for a record label if you can. So for me, before I joined Basie in '93, I was on that path. I had a manager, and we were doing stuff. I was playing jazz festivals with my own group, and we were playing for record companies so we could see if they wanted to sign me. And then Basie calls. I had to put all of that on hold because I wasn't going to turn that down.
Right.
So I had to put all of that solo stuff on hold. And after several years with Basie, maybe about 15 years or so, we had a vocalist join us by the name of Jamie Davis, who was on a small label based in California. And when he did his first recording, he used the Basie Orchestra. He used us. And so I had some solos and stuff like that in the band. And the owners of the record company liked what they heard when he heard my solos. And they said, well, would you, consider, signing with us? I said, really? I hadn't even thought about it. I didn't forget about the solo stuff. And when they made the offer, I said, yeah, I'll do that. And I said, yeah, I had already been planning it. And these are the people that have already said, yes, they're going to play. And they looked at the list. They said, what? I said, Winton? And yeah, of course, I know him. Yeah, what? He signed me right away. And they said, do what you want to do, whatever music you want. And that's what happened. That was 2008 when we finished it. And it came out in 2009. And so I'm going to eventually do another one. I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do. And but I've been so busy with the Basie stuff because I've been producing our last 2 recordings with the orchestra. And that's an ongoing, that's a daily thing. I'm dealing with all of that. So I haven't had time, but I will in the next month or so when we finally finish it. And then I'll be able to start thinking about the next one because I do want to do another one.
Okay.
And I just want to make it a nice, something you put on, you don't have to think. Just put it on and you drive it in the car. So something along the lines of some Brazilian music maybe.
I love
Brazilian. Latin kind of Brazilian. That's kind of
what is it, the lady from Ipanema?
Girl from Ipanema,
Girl from
yeah.
That's one of my favorite
Exactly.
songs.
Might even do that one too.
Okay.
Might do that one. So,
Okay, cool.
but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your most memorable event that happened?
That's a lot of them.
Okay.
You mean with the Basie Orchestra or just
Any.
That's a lot of them. Wow. Oh, probably when I wasted a cup of coffee all over Dizzy Gillespie's suit.
What? What
I just thought about that.
happened?
Yeah, we were at Carnegie Hall. We were getting ready to go on, and we were backstage, and I was with Marcus Roberts. We were opening for him, and he was standing to my right, and he was drinking a cup of coffee like that, and we were talking or doing something. It was a group of us, and somebody hit his arm. I don't know what I did, how I did it, but coffee is all over him. It's all over his blue suit, and he's cursing me out nicely, but but it was funny, So that's
Okay.
one of the things that comes to mind.
Okay.
Because I'm doing this Dizzy thing tomorrow, so I was thinking about that. But there are a lot of them. I mean, Frank Sinatra not showing up one night to sing. He just didn't flat out and my parents had flown up for that too.
You played with Frank
Yeah,
Sinatra?
played Frank Sinatra.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, I was his trumpet soloist for a full week. Yeah,
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah,
That's
1994.
awesome. Okay.
So we were getting ready to open. The show was about to start. We were in our places getting ready to play. And instead of them opening the curtains and him walking out, they said, ladies and gentlemen, tonight's show is canceled. We're like, what? It was a packed house, 6,000 people. And they just said,
Sure, they were angry.
Yeah, so what happened, Don Rickles was the opening act. And so I went to Don, I said, look, man, my parents flew up here. Then my brother flew up here as a surprise and all of that. And I said, because they got to leave. They don't know when I think they were leaving the next day, so they didn't know. We didn't know if they were going to reschedule the show or make up for it, which they ended up doing. So I said, well, maybe they can come back and meet you tonight or something. He said, yeah, go get them.
Okay.
So I went out and got him, and we walking down the hall of Don's dressing room. And as we get closer, he's on the phone.
Okay.
He's talking to somebody. He looks to his left and he sees me and he says into the phone, "Oh my God, there's a bunch of black people with watermelons and spears. I got to go." Oh, click.
What? He really said that?
He said that, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And but he was that's how he was. He just
Okay.
he would put you on. He was a great guy.
Okay.
So we hung out with him for a while, and that's things like that I remember. Certain concerts where we were doing a concert in Russia one time, and the people were so moved they started throwing jewelry on the stage. I'd never seen anything like that.
Wow.
Another time
That's nice.
Yeah, they started throwing jewelry on the stage, and then another time we were in Spain. I think it was Spain, and we were really late. Our flights were late getting in, so the show was supposed to start at 8. We didn't get to the hotel till like 7:15.
Wow.
So, and the roadman, the tour, the promoter was saying, well, just do the best you can, get to your rooms and change and get down when you can. We'll get there when you can, And we ended up getting there about 8:45 or so, like almost an hour late. But when we got there, we got a standing ovation as soon as they heard when we were in the building. Now, we weren't even on stage yet. Standing ovation.
Wow.
And I said, man,
That's awesome.
that's Basie. That's what that is.
Yeah, okay.
And then the other time that happened is when the day that Obama became president. We were in Rome. We had a concert that night. And before we walked on the stage, again, another standing ovation. But we knew that one was for Obama. We just knew.
Okay.
Oh, that's for Obama. That's what that
Okay.
is. And so, things like that, memorable moments like that. You meet kids, you meet people that I meet people all the time that heard Basie in 1938 or 39 or 1940, or they knew him, or they saw us somewhere, or they. So it's an adventure every day, and there are probably hundreds of things I can think of that happened that were really great, funny, sad things too. I've experienced some things on the road that reminds you that okay, you are who you are. I've had that happen, and and all of us have at some point or another. But 99.9% of the time, it's all positive, it's all great, it's all uplifting, and it's just that's why I never get tired of traveling. Never get tired of it.
Okay, that's a good thing. Well, being as accomplished as you are, having recorded before, having written a book, leading Count Basie's orchestra, is there any goal or anything else that you would like to accomplish in your life?
Yeah, get married.
Okay. Okay.
That's probably it.
Okay.
But from my experience, it seems like that's just timing.
Okay.
And I don't think it has anything. Well, I don't like to think it has anything to do with my schedule because pilots travel, stewardesses travel, athletes are gone half of the year. So that right there, I think.
Okay. A lot of times they say musicians are married to their music, or is the music the mistress? Which one is it? I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see why people would say that because music. If you are like, I guess I consider myself born to be doing what I'm doing. Like Picasso said, he didn't choose art. Art chose him. Music chose me. I didn't say I'm going to be a musician. I never said that.
Okay.
I've never said that.
Okay.
I just knew, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So in that respect, you can look at music being a mistress. I can see that. You have to get up at 2 in the morning if something comes to you, or you need to practice, or you just have to do what you have to do. It's not a 9-to-5 life.
Right.
And sometimes some people, I guess, can't, if they don't understand it, they don't know how to allow that to be a part of their lives too.
Right. Especially with the traveling.
Yeah,
being on the road a lot.
Yeah, but I look at the glasses half full. So I tell people all the time, I might be gone a lot, but I'm never boring. I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
And you get the wives and the girlfriends travel around the world. Think about that.
Yeah.
One of the guys who was in the orchestra for 57 years, his wife, they've been married 60 years now, over 60 years.
Oh, wow.
I just saw her last weekend in New York. And when he was in the orchestra, we used to always joke about that. She said, that's one of the reasons we stayed married so long, because he was gone. And I got to travel with him whenever I felt like it. If I wanted to go to London, bam, I could go to London.
Okay.
If I didn't want to go to Japan, I don't have to go. But the next time they go to Japan, I can go.
Okay.
So when you have a choice, to me, when you can do that kind of thing, and you have the means to do it, that's nothing more exciting than that, to me.
I I agree.
And all the guys that are married, that's how they feel about it. That's how their kids feel about it. Their kids get to travel around the world and get to go to places and meet people that they may not have otherwise been able to meet. You know, so I look at it as half full.
Okay.
And if you're not busy, that means you're not doing something, or you're not in demand, or something. If you're just sitting there and you're not on the go, then something's not going on. If you're a musician, that's usually how we kind of look at that. So musicians like to be busy, and I just think it can be hard, you know, if you have somebody that has a job that grounds them 9 to 5 in such a way, and most people have jobs like that. And so it's really nice if you can find somebody that, if they have that, can still manage to, you know, allow travel, or, you know, do stuff like that. So, you know, it's good and bad, but I wouldn't call it bad. I'd call it good, and we have to try to work the other thing out.
Okay. Now, I know I told you I wouldn't be personal, but
Yeah.
I think I have to. Any hopefuls anytime soon, or?
Well, not anytime soon. I don't think. I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Ladies, you hear that, right?
Mhm.
Okay. What do you enjoy most about being the leader of the Count Basie Orchestra?
That's not a hard question, but it kind of is. The fact that I get to hear the music continue on such a high level every night. The fact that I know that the Basie estate and the musicians in the orchestra respect me enough and know that I'm the right person for the job. That is the best feeling of all.
Right.
How they talk to me, how they treat me, how they offer their respect. But I respect them too, you know, and how they know that they're. And I told this other person earlier today, and this is just not bragging, but there's nobody else on the planet that understands that music better than me. Period.
Wow.
Period. I go to my grave saying that.
Well, how did you get that position?
It's just because of my love for the music, basically.
Okay.
When I first joined the orchestra, I mean, it was just, I had already memorized guys' names in the band. So when I got there, I knew who Bill Hughes was. I knew who Bobby Ojeda was. I knew who Kenny Hing was. I knew who Butch Miles was.
Okay.
Because I had the records.
Okay.
So, and I would read the liner notes. I just wouldn't put the record on, you know. I would read everything on the album covers, on the back, on the front. Who's doing that? Oh, he's soloing on that. Okay, so I would memorize his sound. So when I would meet these guys, I would already be familiar with them. And so when I joined, they just saw that. That was just, they just happened to see that. And one of the things that happened, anything that came up that needed to be done, I would volunteer to do it.
Wow.
You know, we didn't have a sound person before I joined the orchestra, like a guy that took care of make sure the sounds and sound and lights were together, the mics were all set up. I did that.
That's awesome.
I started doing
And
that
you
20
know,
years ago.
what's interesting is that a lot of people would have an attitude or big head and feel like they're above that.
No. I still do it. I'm the leader, and I still make sure the sound is right. Absolutely. I still do that because I know it has to be done right, and until I can train somebody else to do it, I'll just continue to do it. I don't have any problems doing that because the audience, when they're in the audience, they have to hear everything exactly how I think they need to be hearing. Just like a well-mixed recording or a CD. So when you're in the audience, it should sound like that. Everything needs to be balanced. And so when I started doing that around 94, 95, I had to figure out what mics were best to use, what mics were best not to use, when to use mics, period, or when not to use them. And I would have to figure out the acoustics for every hall. I figured out a way to do that. And it took me 3 or 4 years to finally get it together so that every time we did a concert, when we do the sound check, I knew exactly where to put the mics and get everything together. And that gave the guys more confidence because they knew, okay, when I play a real subtle solo, it's going to be heard.
Okay.
If I play a flute solo, if I play a muted trumpet solo, or if I play, the pianist plays very soft like Basie did, it's going to be heard.
Okay.
So that became something that was just one of the avenues that they saw, okay, well, he must obviously really care about, because it wasn't about the money. I didn't say, well, I'll do it if you pay me that. They just said, we need somebody to go over to, it was in Spain, too, on that same tour that we were late getting to. I remember she saying, our road manager at the time saying, we need somebody to go over and check the sound. And nobody raised their hand. we were going to the hotel, and she said, anybody want to go? And I said, I'll do it. Why wouldn't anybody want to go do that?
Right.
So I started doing it, and eventually they started paying me for it. So my salary went up and everything, and I still do it. I make sure that the sound is right. I make sure that the lights are right, and, because the people that come to hear the audience and come to hear the music, they don't want to. You don't want to have them missing something. Somebody's in the dark with a light,
Right.
or somebody's solo isn't being heard.
Right.
Somebody's mic is not on.
Right.
That stuff has to be done right. That's
Right.
all. And
So-
it's just, yeah, so that's kind of how that happened.
I guess you were getting ready then.
Yeah.
Speaking of your early days with the Count Basie Orchestra,
Mhm.
what were you doing when you got the call from the then leader of the orchestra,
Yeah.
Mr. Frank Foster?
I was in school at Florida A&M, and this
Okay.
is in the early '90s. But I was also on the road with Marcus Roberts quite a bit. But the main thing I was doing trying to build a solo career. That's the main thing I was doing. So my manager at the time, her name was Fiona Bloom. She lived in New York, and she was having me fly all over the place doing concerts and opening for people like Dave Brubeck. So we were focusing on that, trying to eventually get a recording contract and do more touring on my own, you know. But that's what happened, and then all of a sudden I get this call one day. I thought it was a joke. I actually thought it was a joke, and I remember telling Foss, well, I got to think about it because I'm in the middle of this solo thing. I actually said, I got to think about it, and then the second I hung that phone up, I said, I'll call you right back, you know, like 10 minutes or whatever. The second I hung the phone up, I said, man, when I hung the phone up, all of those years of studying the orchestra and seeing the orchestra and all of that, it made sense because of the call that I just got.
Wow.
Okay, now I see why this is going on. Okay, I got to take that. I got to take that.
Okay.
And so I called him right back and said, of course. And like a week later, I was first class ticket. I was on my way. I was going.
Wow.
And that was January of 1993. Yeah. So,
Okay, January of 1993.
Mhm.
Did you ever think then, in your wildest dreams, that you would be in his position today?
Not right when I first joined it, but a couple of years after that, I started realizing, okay, I was on the path for that. I could see that because nobody in my generation has studied that orchestra more than me.
Wow.
No one. That's
Wow.
just a fact. I'm trying to figure out who the other persons are, and there aren't anybody. Isn't anybody?
What drew you to Count Basie?
It was, it's a real simple thing. When I was growing up in Ebenezer, the Daddy King, we had
Right.
4 choirs there. The church choir, which my mom is still in, they sing mainly Bach and Handel and stuff like that. And then there was a men's chorus, and there was a children's choir. But then there was the M.L. King choir that didn't use the big pipe organ in the middle of the choir stands. They used the Hammond B3 on the floor, which
Okay.
you use the bass pedal
Right.
for, which is it's just like the sound of an acoustic bass, a jazz bass, or bassists walking the bass lines.
Okay.
So I was used to hearing that once a month because they did it every one Sunday out of the month, and I was used to following what they were doing with the bass lines moving and all of that, and the gospel choir with the altos and the sopranos and the tenors and the basses and all of that. And it's about 17, 18, 19, 20 of them, maybe something like that. So I was used to hearing that. So you figure I first heard Basie when I was maybe 10, 11, 12, something like that. So for the first 10 years of my life, once a month, I heard that choir. And the gospel choir is the forerunner of the jazz orchestra. That's all it is.
Okay, explain,
So
please.
the Count Basie Orchestra is a sophisticated gospel choir.
Really?
That's all it is. It's based on the blues. The gospel choir is doing spirituals. The blues and jazz, that's what it's based on the same thing.
What about the sections?
Same thing. Altos, saxophones.
Ah.
Tenors, trombones, or however you want to
Okay.
divide those up.
Okay.
But it's the same thing. So when I heard Basie, I said, oh, my first thought was, oh, that's the same thing I hear in church once a month.
Okay.
Same thing. It's just more sophisticated.
Well, going back to church, I was reading where I believe you were talking about Count Basie, and you were saying something about the Old Testament
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
New Testament.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
I understand that as it relates to the Bible.
Yeah.
Can you please explain that as it relates to jazz music?
Yeah, well, Basie, that term, those two terms are only associated with Count Basie. Because when Basie started the orchestra in 1935, he had the orchestra until about 1948 or 9 when they had to disband due to the war and things like that going on, the recording band and all that kind of stuff. And when they disbanded, he went to from a 14, 15-piece band down to a small group, like a 6 or 7-piece band, from 48 till about 52. And finally, around 51 or 52, things began to change, and they said, you know what, you might as well put the band back together again. So when they put the band back together again, he had some new musicians, and the music had changed because they had been off a while. The new arrangers, when they came back into the band and the musicians, they had been playing more modern jazz. So they brought that influence back into the new band. So it became known as the New Testament band versus the one that he had broken up. That's began to they started to refer to that as the Old
Okay,
Testament band.
okay.
That's how that happened.
Okay.
So the New Testament band began with Frank West and Frank Foster and Thad Jones and all these musicians like that, and that is the orchestra that really began to redefine how the music was played, how big band music was danced to. That's why Jerry Lewis began having them band in his movies. They started having million-selling hits. I mean, they began to do command performances for the Queen of England and all. So the whole thing just began to change. They started working with Sinatra, which put the band on a whole nother economic level and became more in demand. So 1935 till about 1948, that's considered the Old Testament. 1951, 52 until early 60s is the New Testament.
Okay. All right. You are here in Atlanta to play at the Velvet Note, and you will perform pieces by Dizzy Gillespie.
That's right. Yeah.
What made you choose to do his music?
Well, he would have been 100 years old this year.
Oh,
His
okay.
centennial is October 23rd. So
Okay.
I thought, why not do his music? Because his music is very difficult, and a lot of people don't do it because it's difficult.
Okay.
But he was the first one to really fuse Afro-Cuban music with jazz. He and a percussionist by the name of Chano Pozo, around 1948, who played bongos and percussion, Dizzy began to bring the Cuban influence into jazz. So, and Gerald Roy Morton said, who was in the early 1900s, he said jazz wouldn't be jazz if it didn't have that Spanish tinge to it. So Dizzy was a major proponent of that, bringing that in beginning around 1943 or 4 or so into modern jazz. And so today, his music is not done as often as I think it should be done. His number one musical son is a friend of mine named John Faddis. John does a lot of Dizzy's music all the time, and you'd have college bands, and he wrote really famous things like A Night in Tunisia and things like that people do. But I thought to do a whole concert, a whole 2 nights worth of his music would be really fun to do because it's so varied that I can program each set to where each song is different from the one that came before it.
Okay.
So, plus I knew him a little bit, and I thought, let me just do that. And I think another thing for me, a selfish sort of a thing too, practicing his music makes you better. So I said, okay, I got to get in and work on this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely, because you can't have you have to have a high level of technique to play that stuff on the trumpet. And some of it I'm going to mess up, I'm sure. I'm going to go play some. Oh my goodness, that's difficult. But it's difficult. It's
Now,
hard stuff.
I'm going to say this incorrectly, but he manipulated his trumpet where he raised was it the mouthpiece?
Yeah, no, it was the bell. The bell was
Okay,
bent towards.
okay.
When what happened, he was playing a party or gig one night, it was like a party, and he took a break and he set his trumpet down on the floor with the bell. You can sit it, it'll sit straight up, and somebody knocked it over. And when they knocked it over, they knocked loose the brace that held the bell together, and so when he got it back, instead of the bell pointing straight ahead, it was now bent up. When he came back to get it, he was like, what happened to my trumpet? But when he played it, because the bell was closer to his ear, he began to hear the music quicker that way.
Wow.
So when you play a normal trumpet, the bell is about that far from your ear. But when his trumpet got bent, now the bell is here. So
Okay.
it's closer. It was about 6 inches closer to his ear.
Okay.
And he said he kept it like that because now he could hear the music quicker. When he played, it came to his ear quicker. So
Okay. Will you have to change your
no,
trumpet to do that? Okay.
no, I don't do that.
Now, when you play in this so wonderful, I should have asked you to bring your trumpet to play something. But if anyone wants to hear you, they must go to the Velvet Note tonight.
Friday and
Sorry,
Saturday. Yes.
Friday and Saturday,
Yeah.
7:30 and 9:30.
And 9:30, yeah.
Okay. You use a plunger. What does the plunger do to the sound?
It just basically tries to mimic a human voice. That's all it really is.
Okay.
And there, because the way that the instruments are built, the human voice is the most flexible instrument that we have, that we know of, musical instrument that we know of. So trumpets and saxophones and trombones and pianos can't do everything a human voice can do. So if you can find something that can manipulate the pitch, smooth it out, and so you can bend it and stretch it, that's what you want to do, and that's what a plunger can do. So I can almost mimic a baby crying. I can mimic a horse, the sound of a horse, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, wow.
And that's why I like using it, yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of the trumpet mimicking the human voice and the fact that you are going to play pieces by Dizzy Gillespie, he could sing. Can you sing?
No, I don't want to hear that. I mean, I could scat, but Saying that, I just never got into that. No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
And I believe that's it. Is there
Okay.
anything else that you'd like to share and talk about
I think you
this
covered
weekend's
it.
performances?
Well, it's going to be a great band. Gary Motley on piano and the young brother team duo of Robert Boone on drums, who's also the drummer in the Basie Orchestra. I hired him about a year ago. And his younger brother on bass, Brandon Boone. And two saxophonists, Jason Kaplan and John Sanford. So it's going to be a heck of a weekend. We're going to rehearse tomorrow and get everything together, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. So what's next for you after this?
Well, I go back to Tallahassee to begin teaching at Florida State on Monday. School starts, and then and I have some touring coming up with Basie. We got to go back on tour in September to Canada, I think, and some other small group stuff with my band in Tallahassee, though.
Okay.
So I got some things to do there, and I got to go back to Canada again. Yeah. So.
You do have a band in Tallahassee. Tell me about that.
Well, it's the guys that I work with at Florida State. Those are my main guys in my band. But when I'm in Atlanta, there are musicians here that I can use that are really good too. So, but my main group are the guys who are on my Say It Plain CD.
Okay.
Bill Peterson on piano, who's a professor of jazz piano at Florida State. Leon Anderson on drums, who's professor of drums at Florida State. Rodney Jordan on bass, who's professor of bass at Florida State. So that's my main group. But when I'm in Atlanta, I don't have to worry about bringing them up. I could just use the guys here because I like playing with the guys here too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Scotty.
You're welcome. Good luck to you too. You're welcome.
For being my first guest
You're welcome.
on my
welcome.
show. And I would like to thank all of you who tuned in today to the Conversations with Rita show. This show was produced by Fanciful Films Entertainment Company. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.